So how the fuck have you guys been? It's been like, what, a week? A week since we last talked?
Literally nothing has changed.
Yeah.
Exact same.
Everything sucks.
Could have been yesterday. We could have recorded the last episode yesterday. Like, everything's the same. Although I will say one significant event of the week was instead of Friday being my pizza day, Saturday was my pizza day, which means I had pizza for breakfast this morning.
Oh, you are so bad.
I know. No, that's the big news of the week, guys. Pizza day shifted. I'll keep everyone up to date as to whether next week I stick with Saturday. Could be a thing.
Well, as the Aquabats say, hooray for pizza day.
I had White Castle, which is...
You had White Castle.
Which is not, fortunately, not a very common event in my life, but still too common.
Can you make it like not an event in your life?
I'm working on it.
I had my first McDonald's the other month for the first time in probably a decade. I felt really, really guilty about it, but I craved filet of fish. I just absolutely craved it.
Oh, those filet of fish sandwiches are fucking incredible.
The last time I had McDonald's was with you, Mark. We had just done the sleep out. We the next morning we woke up and went to McDonald's.
Oh yeah, like at 5:30 in the morning or something.
Yeah, that was the last time I had McDonald's.
I've never been more like relieved and happy to be in a McDonald's. All it takes is sleeping out on the street all night.
Yeah.
But I will say, pro tip, it'll save you a lot of money. Is if you order, the Dr. Prager's or a similar kind of non-GMO brand, they make little fish fillets. They're frozen, and you just fry them up in the pan. You get like a nice soft bun. You get like some kind of cheddar cheese or American cheese if you want. Make some tartar sauce with pickles, and you can completely like reconstitute the McDonald's ones, and it's like costs you like $2, and they're good.
I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
Just saying, listeners.
Save it for a rainy day.
There's like 4 ingredients, including the bun, so it's pretty hard.
All right, so let's move past fast food. Let's jump into the meat of what we're going to talk about today. So a few weeks ago, Trump had a tweet when the looting starts, the shooting starts, which was talking about the George Floyd protests and the rioting. And Trump's tweet wasn't removed, but Twitter did put a filter over it that said, and justified that by saying this is glorifying violence, but we don't think it should be removed. We think that we should just put this thing over it, and then it can be preserved for posterity or whatever. And Trump, of course, called it censorship, and went on a whole tirade. And as we know, his administration has been very, very much in favor of cracking down on what it sees as censorship from social media platforms. So that's sort of where we're gonna go today, boys.
Well, that's stupid on multiple counts. One, it's not censorship. They didn't even take it down, right? I mean, I would call like putting a little flag on it is a pretty weak move from Twitter. If they actually care about like not promoting the glorification of violence, like you would probably just take it down. But
so I'm on the other side of this, and we'll get into that today. Although I have to say, I agreed with the decision that Twitter made. And I think that the left has somewhat solidified around the idea that social media companies are private entities and have a responsibility to regulate content on their platform. And, they've welcomed the deplatforming of right-wing psychos like Alex Jones and Laura Loomer. They've seen that as a net positive. And, admittedly, it was pretty funny when Laura Loomer chained herself outside Twitter headquarters demanding her account be reinstated.
Yeah, kind of sad, to be honest.
but also somewhat funny.
Yeah, I mean, I admire, I guess, the tenacity.
Very politic of you.
Well, she's running for Congress. I forget. Yeah. I guess Florida already had its primary, so I'm sure she didn't win, but I think she raised a decent amount of money just because of her support from the far right.
That's crazy.
Like, as far as this deplatforming thing goes, right? I think that these social media platforms have a right to not let their communities turn into cesspools, right? But I do think like there should be an outside entity that decides this by committee and that has oversight versus just Jack Dorsey in a
absolutely.
room. You know, I think that's where the danger comes in.
There are no. I think there are very few people on Earth who are worse people to be kind of deciding what, for example, is online harassment or even worse, hate speech or incitement to violence, are the CEOs of these tech companies who A, have like no life experience or reason to be an expert on this stuff, and B, have every incentive to not censor their platforms because they want to make as much money as possible. Zuckerberg, of course, being the prime offender in this regard. But yeah, I just think it's crazy that like they're not, you know, consulting, at least if they are consulting with outside kind of expert groups and civil rights organizations. I mean, they do it to a bare minimum.
Well, yeah.
So I may disagree with you gentlemen then a little bit today, and hopefully by the end of this conversation we all have a better understanding of the problem, and our listeners have a better understanding of the problem and understand the different aspects that are at play. I propose to you gentlemen that social media censorship, however minimal, ought to be viewed with extreme skepticism. And so that's what we're going to be. That's sort of where we're going to be headed today. Hello and welcome to another episode of Gilded Age, the podcast where we discuss how and why we're fucked. As always, I'm Walker Bragman.
I'm Alex Koch.
I'm Mark Colangelo.
Today we're going to be continuing our series on speech with a discussion of social media, its effect on our national discourse, and of course, as we've said, censorship.
And now it's time for our weekly segment, Tweet of the Week. Every week, we want to highlight really the best of online, the smartest thought leaders and the biggest galaxy brains of the digital era. And today, I'm going to give you guys the pleasure of hearing a tweet from controversial lawyer Lisa Bloom. This is in no way an endorsement of Lisa Bloom. She has a bit of a complicated past defending and litigating against sexual assaulters, but that's not why we're here. Lisa, this morning on Sunday, the 28th of June, quote tweeted a TMZ tweet. It said, Mike Tyson takes selfies with crowd on Venice Beach. There's a photo of him and a young woman kind of putting their hands up. Mike's got his mask around his neck. And so Lisa Bloom quote tweets it and says, wearing a mask under your chin is like wearing a condom on your balls.
I'd give that like a 7 out of 10 as far as tweets go.
Yeah, that's pretty good. That's pretty good.
I mean, I think it's pretty accurate, honestly. Like, I LOL'd when I read it because, I mean, that's
Did
one of my...
Did you say you LOL'd?
Yeah, I LOL'd. It's now, it's in the Webster's dictionary, man. Come on.
Oh, God.
Times. It's now a word. But no, I laugh because, like, that's one of the most aggravating things to me in the COVID era is just seeing people with masks around their necks in public. Like, it's probably every third person who has a mask. It's actually not even performing its function.
Oh my God, man. Yeah. Like the other day, I let 2 people into the building who were, I guess from management, and that neither of them had masks on. And
oh my God, that's
one of them
ridiculous.
turned to thank me. It's like, dude, don't even look at me. Like,
it'll be just the dumbest tragedy of all time if we end up with hundreds of thousands more people dying and having to go back into phase 1 again just because because masks have become a political thing and we can't figure out how to use them.
It will be. I mean, it really already is. We're in one of the dumbest times in history, and I'm including the Dark Ages in that history. It's amazing how dumb we've become as a society. But it is. It's driven by our leaders, who are the ultimate morons and frankly, in a lot of cases, evil assholes.
Well, we get the leadership we deserve.
I just don't understand. Like, if Trump had like any fucking common sense at all, like he would be be taking this crisis seriously and standing out in front. His administration seems to, or his campaign rather, seems to have taken the position that acknowledging that this crisis exists is bad will inherently be bad because he's president, and no handling of this crisis could reflect positively on him, and it's stupid.
It's just him doubling, tripling, quadrupling down on his initial fuck up of not recognizing what this is, and he can't.
The incompetence is staggering.
He can't stop saying that, if we only stopped testing, we wouldn't have any cases. Like, it's just the stupidity
how did
is
that
incredible.
Go away, by the way, that nothing ever happened with that. He
keeps
said
saying
in front of, I don't know, 4,000 people, however many people came to his rally,
right.
that
1 million. It was 1 million.
Yeah,
Brad
1 million.
Parscale told me it was 1 million people.
That he told his administration to stop pushing for testing so that the numbers would look lower.
Right. Well, what happened was people around him kind of said it was a joke. I think Mike Pence included, and then Trump ended up saying, "No, I meant it." And then, but that's amazing ad footage for a Democrat. I think the Lincoln Project, who are not Democrats, are these weird Republicans who kind of claim to not want Trump and the Republican senators to keep their jobs. I think they put out an ad like pretty immediately on it. Like they're very fast to it. It wasn't a bad ad.
The worst incumbent. I mean, one of the weakest incumbents ever, maybe. I mean, his mishandling of this crisis is truly staggering, and even a candidate like Biden could win.
I mean, if I were running for president against the current president in our current crazy time, like, I would be doing what all those governors do whenever there's a crisis: is you have a daily briefing. You wear your special jacket, your like get to work jacket. If it's a hurricane, it's like a green one, and I don't know, you put on some dumb costume and you go out there and you can have very scripted if you want. I mean, Biden would need it very scripted. So like, have a very short, very scripted thing. Talk about real solutions to this every day. Get out there. And the campaign and now a lot of the political reporters are kind of writing like this. Oh, this is what a smart strategy. Just like shut them up in a basement. It's like maybe, but like if things change, if the economy ticks up, Biden would have nothing. People be like, where was Biden?
And now for a message from our sponsor.
This episode of Gilded Age is brought to you by Emerdata. When we were Cambridge Analytica, sure, we had white nationalist Steve Bannon on our board. Yeah, we were heavily financed by right-wing megadonor Robert Mercer. And okay, we might have harvested user data from maybe around 87 million Facebook users and sold it to the Trump campaign. But we're different now. We're Emerdata, a brand new data consultancy. At Emerdata, we value your right to privacy. In fact, we're partnering with Mark Zuckerberg and the NSA to develop the world's toughest encryption technology for our new text and video app. Next time you'd like to send Attorney General William Barr some fan mail, make sure you're using the Emerdata app, the new communications app that will never, ever create a psychological profile of you and hand it off to fascist political operatives. Emerdata. Forget about all that Cambridge Analytica stuff.
So it's hard to imagine our lives today without social media, which is funny because it was created relatively recently, within the last 20 years, really. YouTube was created actually in 2005, February 2005. Facebook was created February 2004, and Twitter was created in March of 2006. I mean, we are the generation that grew up sort of before social media and during the rise of social media.
We are another way to think about it is we are the subjects of the largest scale psychological experiment in the history of humanity.
No, that's I think that's totally accurate. I think a lot about like how we're just starting to really see the effects of social media, like many years after, relatively speaking, a number of years after it kind of came to be. And it's pretty troubling.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's so weird when you think about like what the original promise of social media was, that it would revolutionize the world. It would connect us all, and it would open us up to new ideas and whatnot. And really, I think what's actually happened is that formed ideological bubbles around ourselves.
So we form bubbles, and it's, I love the idea that it would give humanity a central nervous system, basically, but it's like, it's unclear, like, how that nets out when we're basically feeling the pain of every person on Earth at all times. Like, can we sustain that? Will ultimately be a force for the better, or is it just so destabilizing?
And that's a very good question, because the world is online. I mean, Facebook went public in May of 2012, Twitter in 2013. That's just and from there they now dominate the industry. These platforms are fucking ubiquitous. I mean, Facebook has like 2.6 billion monthly users, active monthly users, and those are numbers from the first quarter of 2020. Twitter has 126 million daily users as of February of 2019, and YouTube has 2 billion users. Politicians today use websites like Twitter and Facebook as part of their jobs. Trump fired former Secretary of State Rex Tillerson in a tweet. Actually, Trump got sued for blocking people. The court cited that as a reason why he couldn't block people, because they said that his use of Twitter had created a public forum of sorts.
Yeah, I was actually part of that lawsuit. Yeah, really? I think it was the Knight Center at Columbia was part of it, and I was just contacted because I think I had tweeted a few times that I was blocked, and they actually they got me unblocked. So thank God my life is so much better now.
That is fascinating. That's really cool. Look, we have our own piece of history on this podcast. Gilded Age. One of the Gilded Boys is a piece of history. He belongs in a museum. We should put that clip from Indiana Jones right in there. So, social media became a huge integral part of our lives, but it's important to understand how that situation came to be. And to do that, we have to look at the law. So in 1996, Congress passes the Communications Decency Act. And this is an act that's largely aimed at controlling porn and cracking down on online pornography. Because back in the 90s, everybody was still freaked out that you could have porn you stream directly to your house and anybody could activate it. Like, the most graphic things that you could possibly imagine could be brought right into your living room. Your kid could stumble upon it with the websites like thewhitehouse.com or whatever. And
I remember that.
Yeah. So naturally, a lawsuit arises. And most of the Communications Decency Act is struck down in the following year in 1997. But one particular part of it survives, and that is Section 230. Section 230 basically says that no platform can be liable for third-party content. And that's sort of the basic building block of everything online today. It's why we have user reviews on Amazon. It's why we have social media platforms. It's been called the most important free speech legislation ever. And it really did revolutionize the world. The theory, of course, is like, let's say Facebook is a bookstore, and the content that users post on Facebook are the books. The bookstore can't be liable for the books, which, that makes sense to me. So before Section 230, you had what is known as the moderator's dilemma. Like, websites that tried to make family-friendly environments or like crack down on content were actually held to accountable in court, whereas websites that didn't do anything about it generally were not. So it created a problem. Like, how much can you moderate? Do you risk being liable for the third-party content on your website, or do you just have a free-for-all Wild West environment and not do anything?
So this is what made it possible for any of these platforms to be built, right? Because there'd be such an immense risk in even starting to build it if you were liable for anything that anyone put on it.
Right. So Section 230 solves the moderator's dilemma. It gives websites the ability to moderate, indeed maybe even a mandate to moderate, while giving them a shield to liability. So you can, as moderating the content on your website is not going to open you up to liability like it would before Section 230. So one of the earliest cases for Section 230 is Zoran versus America Online, Inc. So Ken Zoran is this guy. His name is attached to an ad for an offensive T-shirt that references the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. The T-shirts say "Naughty Oklahoma," which is pretty offensive. I think we could all agree it's pretty offensive. And he alleges that AOL was negligent in failing to respond to the ads, but he loses, and the court reasons that thanks to Section 230, AOL doesn't have any obligation to him. They don't have to moderate the content because they're not liable for it.
So this case was in 96 after the bombing.
Yes.
After the bombing and after the act passed, of course.
Yep. And so it's a test case for it, and maybe not the best result. I mean, you probably feel bad for Ken Zoran. Poor guy's name and reputation were attached to these offensive T-shirts, and he ends up losing. But it is important because out of Section 230 arises the modern internet. I mean, can you imagine if Facebook were liable for the content of your content or my content? I mean, it doesn't really work. So there is a potential problem with Section 230, and that is the Good Samaritan Clause, which allows providers to curate content as they see fit, as long as it's done in good faith. And so this opens the door for arbitrary moderation. And that we do see that today, where Trump's tweet wasn't censorship. What happened to Trump's tweet was not censorship. But I have had content that I've posted on Twitter, specifically photos from Yemen, taken down under the same guidelines that Trump's tweet was cited for, glorifying violence. And that's pretty problematic.
Yeah, I mean, that seems like an example of a bad algorithm or something.
But a lot of content moderation is done by hand, by people. It's because you do have algorithms at play, but you don't, and we'll get to that later, but a lot of it is done by people. And it's difficult because you have tweets that may seem threatening, may seem violent, but it turns out they're either newsworthy or maybe the context makes it not violent. Like, what if somebody tweeted all the other kids with their pumped up kicks better outrun my bullet?
Foster the people.
That
reverence.
Right. That could be seen as a threat to, or somebody, a school shooter, a potential school shooter, or it could be a song lyric, or it could be an inside joke, or whatever. There's actually a really great TED Talk about this. Just sort of explaining Section 230. Although I have to say I disagree with the speaker's ultimate conclusion that this part of the law has to be preserved exactly as it is today and is sort of sacrosanct. Anyway, I think that this is a good jumping off point for our discussion of censorship, because while you may end up getting rid of some content that is problematic or violent, you could also, these companies they're not newsrooms. They don't have editors. They don't have the resources or the wherewithal to judge what is newsworthy and what is not. And given how big they are, censoring content, the potential for harm is very great.
Well, I'll have plenty of stuff to say about some of those things you say. I think it's worth noting that the U.S. is pretty unique in having this Section 30. European countries, Canada, Japan, really most other countries don't have similar statutes on the books. So that might be something to discuss in a later episode, kind of comparing our system to other countries. But
and there's social media in those countries too, Facebooks and Europe, and with the exception of China and North Korea and a few other.
Right. They have their own censorship that's a little heavy-handed.
So yeah, I mean that's true, and we can discuss that in a later episode. But it's important to note that government efforts to sort of reform Section 230 have have greater liability. Government efforts have been sort of counterproductive. You had FOSTA, the Fight Online Sex Trafficking Act of 2018, that was pushed through, which says websites are liable for knowing or possibly, if they know or could have known about sex trafficking on their service, then they're liable. And the result of this actually made it harder for law enforcement to track sex trafficking because it's no longer online. And it made it harder for sex workers who were forced back onto the street, and ultimately resulted in a bunch of websites just shuttering their personal sections. For example, Craigslist took down its personals page. Tumblr banned adult content. Facebook banned adult speech. And in addition to that, it made it more difficult for startup companies to compete because these big companies have the resources to deal with that regulation, whereas the small companies may not. They can't handle the fees, the fines, and so the crackdown has been sort of really, I think, counterproductive.
Yeah, so that is such another interesting dynamic at play. You see these big companies often inviting regulation because these are hurdles that they will manage, and they might be expensive. But what they do is they freeze out competition because no smaller, soon to be social media app or whatever will have the resources to handle all this at first.
That's true.
Well, and also if you're a big enough company with enough DC lobbyists, you can help write the regulations with your lobbyists. So, it's kind of like the oil companies kind of starting to say they want a carbon tax because they know they can control that legislative process.
It seems like every time something bad happens on the internet, there are calls for censorship. And the best example of this that we're going to talk about through this episode is the 2016 election and the revelations that Russia interfered through social media platforms. So, of course, the news that Russia acted against Hillary Clinton via online memes and ads sparked huge outrage among Democrats and liberals. So you have a greater demand for content moderation. You have Joe Biden coming out and saying that Section 230 should be revoked, immediately should be revoked, number one. For Zuckerberg and other platforms, it should be revoked because it is not merely an internet company. It's propagating falsehoods they know to be false. But even the progressives have sort of gotten on board with this idea that maybe it's time for social media companies to regulate their content. Bernie Sanders in 2019 says tech giants and other online platforms should not be shielded from responsibility when they knowingly allow content on their platforms that promotes and facilitates violence. Obviously Bernie Sanders that's not language to be injected into legislation. It's just a general principle. I don't find the principle objectionable, but I do worry about the language of any legislation that attempts to do that. Attorney General William Barr has, in response to the Trump saying social media companies have like an anti-conservative bias, his administration has also sought to crack down on Section 230. William Barr's recommendations include restrictions on cyber stalking and terrorism, and as well as measures to punish sort of arbitrary moderation, which may ultimately be a good thing. Cracking down on arbitrary moderation by these companies, although I do think it misses the main point that perhaps the time has come to nationalize these platforms. We'll get to that.
I don't know what arbitrary really means in this context. I mean, I generally would assume that anything that William Barr is proposing has completely malicious intent. But do you know what they mean by arbitrary?
So Barr's proposal would only grant immunity for moderation decisions that are, quote, done in accordance with plain and particular terms of service and accompanied by a reasonable explanation. That, to me, doesn't sound objectionable.
So they're just, but terms of service that the companies set themselves. So they're just saying you have to abide by your own rules, which is technically what's supposed to be happening now.
Right. It seems toothless, to be honest. It doesn't sound bad. Although I would like to have some kind of general principle that applies to these platforms, or just nationalize them. We'll get to this.
And I wanted to mention, I just came across Tom Hartman op-ed today. I was listening to his podcast and he mentioned it, and then I was like, oh wow, we're about to record on the very topic. So he actually wrote about 230, and Hartman is a progressive radio commentator. He's been on the airwaves for a long time. His AM radio show actually introduced me to Bernie Sanders back probably around 2010 or so, when I had a car and I was driving, and I lived in North Carolina and I had cause to listen to the radio a lot. So that was kind of interesting. But he wrote an article recently, and it talks first of all about the origin of what's called qualified immunity, and he says it first took hold in 1967 in a Supreme Court case called Pearson versus Ray, when it was used to shield white police officers from a lawsuit they faced for enforcing segregation. So that doesn't necessarily. It doesn't necessarily tie in with today, but it kind of does in a way, because a lot of this talk around 230 and the immunity of corporations against racist speech. So there is kind of a correlation. So basically, Tom Hartman in the 80s and early 90s, he worked as a moderator on message boards for CompuServe. And I guess he and his partner were kind of directing the operation. There was a lot of employees because they had to be on call 24/7. Because they had to remove, this was in the 80s and early 90s, before the Communications Decency Act was law, and before Section 230, of course, was part of that. So Tom Hartman argues that Facebook and Twitter should not be immune from liability. Now, I think his argument is saying that, in the 80s and 90s, like, a small company, I guess CompuServe was probably it wasn't a small company, but it wasn't a Facebook-sized company. So he said, we were able to handle this because it was a relatively small operation, and we were liable for content that we published on our site. That was third-party content. That was people just writing stuff on our blogs, and basically, what that means is that if Facebook and Twitter had to abide by this restriction, liability, they never would have scaled up to the size they are now. And Facebook, which is providing Mark Zuckerberg with $80 billion worth of wealth, which is what he's worth now. I think that's shot up during COVID. That wouldn't have happened. He wouldn't be the powerful billionaire he is now if his company had actually had to consider liability for what its users post on its platform. So I think that's an interesting take, and I'm not opposed to it. I guess I would say I'm sympathetic to it. I'm not 100% for or against it, but I think that it is an interesting perspective from a radio broadcaster who has worked in content moderation in the past.
But, okay, so to give you an idea of like how difficult it is to moderate content today, every minute, 400 hours of content is uploaded to YouTube, right? Like moderating that is hugely expensive.
It's almost impossible.
I know, but
right.
So I'm working backwards is tougher than kind of just like going back in time and never passing the act. But my argument is that these are giant monopolies that many politicians are talking about trying to break up for antitrust reasons. But they're so big and their CEOs are so wealthy and so powerful that wouldn't have happened if they hadn't had immunity from the content that they publish. Maybe not, but we also might not have websites like YouTube in the first place.
This is the great dilemma of this topic. Like, you have, on the one hand, like the size of these social networks is revolutionizing the way humans interact. Like, you can get news from Yemen directly into your feed from living in like Wyoming, directly into your Twitter feed. You can know what's happening halfway around the world. You can be exposed to brutality, and as Mark said, you can sympathize and feel shame and anger and outrage about something that you would never even come in contact with without social media. So that's huge. That's an important thing. But the position that I take on this is that perhaps there's a need to have a social media platform that is national, that's not run by a private company, where the outer bounds of what is acceptable content are the outer bounds of the First Amendment. So it doesn't protect incitement, it doesn't protect threats, and and harassment, but it would protect pretty much anything else.
So you think that you think that there are necessary evils,
Right?
That and the net good outweighs.
Yes, I think that the benefit of having a national social media platform where you can be exposed to anything, and content restrictions are subject to based restrictions are subject to strict scrutiny by the Supreme Court under the First Amendment. I think that is an ideal. That is a good system.
I don't know. I'm pretty wary of the government being the ones to say what's protected speech and what's not. I mean, given how quickly governments can turn fascist or how quickly the Supreme Court can turn right wing and politicized, I'm not really. I don't think I would be in favor of that. I know some community groups are also not in favor of that.
You do already see how quickly this becomes political, because when the left pushes to moderate content, it's because it's detrimental to them politically what's going on, and then the right does the same thing when it's detrimental to them. So I do hear you, but I do think it's better than just these technocrats in a boardroom somewhere deciding what a billion people are going to be thinking today.
Well, I don't think that's good either. I think there's, I mean, we've touched on it, and we'll touch on it later. But yeah, we need to have experts on hate speech and on misinformation and things, be together. And as one of you said, and I think Mark, you said, in a coalition that can work independently of the companies themselves and these idiot executives who have no idea about the impacts of what their platforms are doing.
But here's the thing. Hate speech is protected. Threats and incitement are not under the First Amendment.
So you're saying what should be allowed on social media platforms, it would be the same thing that would be allowed in the public square.
Exactly. Because I think these platforms are the new public square. I mean, look, Facebook has 2.6 billion active monthly users. Twitter is used by virtually every politician in this country to connect with voters, to even conduct business.
I'm just saying there's two different ways to look at it in terms of how these platforms are used. Like, one is post to post, looking at tweet by tweet or Facebook post by Facebook post, right? That's an easy way to be like, okay, this is one iteration of speech, and I'm going to use my kind of rubric or whatever I have to determine if it's incitement to violence or not. Even though there is a lot of gray area, I would argue, in even within where hate speech turns into incitement and what that means. But the other thing is just in terms of accounts, like canceling accounts or suspending accounts. And I certainly am someone who's reported a lot on online hate speech and online hate groups that recruit online and things like that. I think that companies, again, with advisory from, outside groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center, Color of Change, the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, groups like that, which are banding together in a coalition and recommend and begging these companies to let them help them out and let them and tell them what tools to adopt. I think that taking down a lot of these hate groups from mainstream social media platforms is a really important thing, and it is happening, but just too slowly. But when you get these people off of Facebook, for example, where they can moderate their language, not necessarily get kicked off for a post by post basis, but then they can recruit people to their websites and to their encrypted Discord chats and things like that. That's where they really radicalize the people they were trying to recruit. So Facebook and Twitter, but especially Facebook, are used as tools to recruit white nationalist extremists, and I think that's important.
And I do think that there is. I love how clean the idea of treating social media just like the public square and just deferring to the Constitution is, but there are important differences between just saying something in the public square and saying it on social media, and this gets into ad dollars and how easy it is to amplify certain voices and certain ideas, and then it gets into the algorithms that are now running these platforms. Because they're optimized to favor certain things, and it can turn these platforms into propaganda machines very easily. So algorithms, this is a word that you've probably heard a ton, but if you're like me, you did not really fully understand what an algorithm is and what it does. So at their basis level, they're basically these invisible sets of instructions that tell a computer how to accomplish a certain task. And you can think of them as like these little invisible wizards within the machine on your phone, deciding what content you're going to see today, what you're going to hear, what's going to get pushed to the forefront. And these algorithms have now, in the digital age where we live, on our screens as much as in the real world, gained so much control over our lives, more than any of us would really want to think about. They'll decide everything from what you're going to watch, what's going to be boiling Walker's ass today. Even now, like, it's seeped into your romantic prospects, right? Because this algorithm is giving you, on Tinder or whatever the app is, a menu of choices that could affect the rest of your life. And you don't see how these things work behind the scenes. But let's just focus for this discussion on algorithms in the context of what you're seeing on your newsfeed. So you guys might remember back in the day, 5-10 years ago, which is like a lifetime ago, when posts were sorted chronologically. So you'd see stuff in your feed from your friends in the order that it was posted in. That's not the case anymore. Algorithms are now sorting the posts that you see in your newsfeed, and they're doing it based on, quote, relevancy, rather than when these things were published. But the rub is, what does relevance mean, and who decides this? So you're not deciding this, not consciously at least. The decision now is mostly made based on what's most likely to grab your attention and to hold your attention. So this is what the algorithms are optimizing for, because this is what generates the most ad revenue. And at the heart of this thing is the advertising model. That's why Mark Zuckerberg is worth $80 billion. That's where all the money comes from. So it's not optimizing for what would make you a healthier person, a better person, a more informed citizen. It's optimized for what's going to make you click, to engage, and to spend more time on the platform. And so there's this kind of, I guess it's become a trope now, that when you're not paying for a service, then you are the product, which is true. More precisely, though, your attention and your time is the product. And I can picture Mark Zuckerberg just feeding on your attention like Shin Godzilla feasts on radiation, right? And every second you spend looking at the screen, it's just making him bigger and stronger and
then
more
he morphs
monstrous.
into like a different type of life form, and then he morphs into another.
And then he destroys the city, and then eventually the world.
Oh, great movie.
So I think I like to hope he's
awful guy, great movie.
Yes, the best Godzilla, in my opinion.
No. The second best Godzilla.
Second best Godzilla? What's the first best Godzilla?
Gojira.
Oh, I don't know.
Come on, the first one. The first Godzilla ever.
I haven't seen it in a while.
Oh my god, you gotta watch it again.
If you're listening to this on SoundCloud, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your casts, please consider becoming a paid subscriber on Patreon. For $5 a month, you'll get access to premium episodes, which will often be interviews with politicians, candidates, reporters, authors, and professors. So, if you can, please pitch in at patreon.com/GildedAge. Gilded Age. Gilded Age. Gilded Age.
So back to, why attention turns Mark Zuckerberg into Godzilla. So to understand this, let's talk about the attention economy. So nowadays, every business, whether it's a meditation app, or it's the New York Times, or it's Facebook, Netflix, Twitter, they're all competing for your attention, because more time and more attention means more ad revenue. So this is the way you win, is to get people's attention and to hold it for as long as possible. And naturally now there's this arms race for people's attention, and we need more and more of it every day and every month and every year. And it turns out that the best way to win is to understand how people's minds work and their vulnerabilities, and to game that. And so there are teams of engineers now behind the curtain designing just ever more insidious ways to get you to pay attention to their app and spend more time on their products. So, for example, these notification buttons, they're designed like slot machines to spit out intermittent variable rewards, so that opening your app gives you the same little dopamine rush that you feel when you pull the lever on a slot machine. Or, they play on our basic needs for social validation, or to reciprocate. You see people's birthday notifications every day, and then you need to go onto the app, wish them a happy birthday, and in the process go through your news feed and see everything that Facebook also wants to show you.
God, that's one of the things I miss least about Facebook. I quit Facebook a couple years ago. Is just literally the people I haven't heard from in 365 days, and who just say happy birthday. And that's it. They just write happy, and sometimes there's not even an exclamation point, and sometimes it's just HBD.
It's like the saddest, most forced HBD ever.
Right. I'm like, guys, come on, like at least capitalize your acronym. Fuck.
I mean, I'm guilty of it too, because people write happy birthday to me, and then I feel bad, 2 months later when I don't go back and say the same thing back to them. It makes me feel like
you
a
just
bad
have to
person.
be an asshole and say, I'm not going to stoop.
I don't feel bad. I just take all the happy birthdays.
You're a terrible person, Walker.
No, look, it's
No, it's in the larger scheme of things the right thing to do.
Just take your happy birthdays, gentlemen. ignore just say thank you and move on, and like hopefully understand that the people will understand that you don't spend all of your time on social media, and like they don't remember your fucking birthday. They saw it because of Facebook. So like maybe you weren't on Facebook that day, or maybe you were. I don't know. This is how I rationalize it to myself.
I'm for it. I support you.
I mean, I'm for like I don't want to be seen as a hypocrite, because I did rejoin recently, just because of a project that I'm working on, and eventually I had to like create a page,
tell yourself what you need to, Alex.
Wait, let's do an experiment. What's my birthday, Alex? What month is my birthday, Alex? Mark, what month is my birthday?
August.
Fuck you.
That's my birthday.
Yeah.
Well, no, Walker, we've only known each other like a year and a half, so I feel like I can I get a little leeway, because it's only been a year and a half.
Yeah, but it's been a good year and a half.
It's been the best year and a half of my life. Are you kidding?
Right. It's highlight of my time on this planet.
Thank you. I would expect so, but and honestly, several months out of that year and a half have been quarantined, so. I don't know.
But we've spent time together during quarantine.
Well, we have managed to do that a little bit. But when is your dang birthday?
August 4th.
Oh, it is August. So Mark was right.
It is.
Okay.
It is.
So,
he is right.
So that should be easy, because I'm also August, so it shouldn't be hard to remember that.
I wished Mark happy birthday, but I don't know the month.
Did you say HBD?
I'm a bad friend.
I'm a Libra.
I'm a bad friend.
Okay.
and I've known Mark for a decade.
Oh, wow.
No, it's because you're used to Facebook just telling you. It's taken our autonomy away from us.
I'm so used to it.
So these algorithms are now deciding what's in your news feed, right? And they're optimized to get your attention. It turns out that things that are good for us are not really the best at holding our attention. It turns out that things like outrage or pictures of cute animals, these are really persuasive and really effective at getting us to spend more time on these platforms. So the algorithm learns to optimize for serving you this kind of content. And in turn, all these publications like the New York Times, all of journalism, and a ton of other industries who are also working on the advertising model and have become slaves, let themselves become slaves to these social media platforms to get their audience, learn to optimize for this too. And this is where the whole clickbait phenomena comes from, right? And it's hard to overstate what a terrible incentive this is and what a problem it poses. Because when you're getting paid just to get people to click, there's no incentive, for example, to do a long form, well-researched piece about, Russia in the 90s, for example, to take a piece that Walker worked on. These things take a lot of time and a lot of money and a lot of thought and a lot of energy to write. So this really gets at the heart of what's destroying journalism. There's just no incentive to do good journalism anymore, because in the marketplace of attention, you'll get outcompeted by listicles about llamas who think that they're models, or just a recapitulation, of the latest outrageous Trump tweet, and then they get their click and they get their money, and they're in and they're out.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very fortunate in my career as a journalist. I've never had to write like 5 articles a day or 3 articles a day like a lot of poor journalists have to do. But it is crushing just to like be in the same newsroom as people who have to do that, and like I really feel really awful for them.
It's so tough, and fortunately there are subscription model is still a thing. I think Patreon is great, and people are still we need a mass movement to just subscribe, because the more we can pay people for the work they're doing, the less of a stranglehold people like Mark Zuckerberg are going to have on our attention, on our discussion, on our minds.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really great connection you're making between just Mark Zuckerberg being a tyrant and Facebook being sort of impossible to ignore, and just in the death of media. I mean, I guess like the way to really counter Facebook and to stop your kind of enslavement to these giant tech properties is to go to reader support models, subscription models, or go nonprofit and try to get grants, which of course is easier said than done.
Please subscribe to our podcast.
Yeah, please subscribe to our podcast, $5 a month or $9 a month for bonus episodes and a monthly AMA with the Gilded Boys.
That's exciting. We get to meet our audience.
Yeah, we're waiting for I just put that's a new kind of sponsorship level on our Patreon. So it's $9 a month. I believe if you pay $5 a month, you're considered a railroad tycoon. And $9 a month is like a steel baron, I think. So
Alex, I'm very impressed with these like gimmicky things. We're to our listeners, we're very accessible people, not very intimidating people. Not a lot of pomp and circumstance. I mean, look at us.
Yeah, and imagine if you're a railroad tycoon and you're coming into our AMA and asking us all these questions. I mean, we're going to give you the respect that you deserve.
So this business model, this is going on with all the questions of censorship and what content to show and what not to show, and it's also a consideration. Like Pringles, Lay's, Pepsi, or whoever owns Pringles does not want their Pringles ad next to the pictures that Walker's funneling in from Yemen about the atrocities happening there. So this is another sort of just perverse incentive in the whole tangle of perverse incentives that are
right. Twitter wants to be a widely accessed platform. It wants people using it. It wants people enjoying their experience. So it doesn't particularly have any incentive to run a graphic image from Yemen.
Even though that's like the most important and valuable thing that could come of this platform is people seeing what's going on in the world.
Right. To give people a little background, Yemen is facing now COVID on top of being 5 years a war-torn nation, cut off from the rest of the world by a U.S.-backed Saudi blockade. Millions of people, like 23 million, 22 million people there are food insecure. Their medical infrastructure has been decimated. 100,000 people have died in the conflict, the fighting, the constant air raids, and it's been called the world's worst humanitarian crisis. It's ground zero for history's worst cholera outbreak, and now it faces COVID. So, it's an important story. It'll be probably one of the most underreported stories from this time, and one of the things that we look back on in 30, 40, 50 years and really, really regret how this crisis was handled, how the world did not step in, how we left Yemen to its fate. So yeah, that's why it's so important that these images get out.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important that Yemeni journalists don't have to feel that they have to censor their own content, that they can post what they need to post.
Or that they'll go through all the work of putting their lives online to get it, and then Twitter will take it down. Right.
And it also, there's another aspect to this. It opens them up to attack by bots who report their tweets, or malicious users who will go and report their tweets with the graphic content, and Twitter will limit their accounts or take the tweets down. And so it's a very bad, that is not a workable system today. Whereas if this were a national system and the outer bounds here were, for a U.S.-based company, were the outer bounds of the First Amendment, that content would not be able to be restricted.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I feel like you're being pretty optimistic. I mean, given the United States' role in arming the Saudis who have been massacring the Yemenis for several years, like, I don't know. I wouldn't really trust the government to impartially regulate speech.
But it's
about
not.
Yemen.
It's not government regulating this. Like, in the public forum, it's not I mean, there is some regulation of expression. I mean, time, place, and manner restrictions on expression, but you wouldn't have the same. You're looking at it like the government would lay out a set of boundaries, but those limits would have to be tailored to meet the requirements of the First Amendment, and there is a legal system for that. And I don't know. I'm on the side of less regulation is better, because there's no way to guarantee that newsworthy content doesn't get taken down if we mandate these private companies start, regulating their content a certain way. There's no guarantee that they're going to protect newsworthy content.
Yeah, but there's also a guarantee that hate groups are going to be targeting people, and there's going to be ill effects of that. So I mean, it's complicated.
But the U.S. government is the biggest hate group in the world. We cause more devastation.
Yeah,
to people
so that's why they shouldn't.
Other.
That's why they shouldn't be in charge of policing our speech.
But it's not policing our speech. It's just it's maintaining an open forum for speech.
Well, but look, I mean, there's going to be all kinds of lawsuits, and you're only, if you do get something taken down, then I mean, this goes for whoever's moderating. It's just like,
at least there's a process then, right? At least there's a process. Whereas if Twitter takes something, but if Twitter takes something down, it's a private company.
Yeah, but only people with money can do these lawsuits, right? Like, there's going to be these inequities built into it. I don't really think it would be that successful.
No system is perfect, but it's far better that a court of law is reviewing the takedown of content compared to a private company that's incentive is to draw clicks and to maintain the widest user base possible. Like, the incentives for a private company are all wrong to handle a forum for that affects the national discourse.
If these companies would agree to have outside experts do that work and set the terms for them, that would probably be better than the government monitoring our speech. But that's also,
what's there to mandate that?
Well,
how are you going to mandate that?
Public pressure. Like, I mean, it sucks. It's not easy, but I mean, a lot of companies are leaving Facebook now, and then immediately, Zuckerberg made some changes to their rules, probably temporary and probably bullshit. But it was nothing else worked. It doesn't matter what Trump says or does. It's only that ad revenue was really dropping.
It comes down to the ad revenue.
So if public sentiment is against online hate and misinformation, then that's actually going to positively impact.
Sure, but public sentiment isn't going to be like, you should allow these pictures of children with their heads blown apart from this war zone, that these bodies that were piled up by U.S. armaments. That's not going to be. There's not going to be public pressure for that. It's going to be whatever's popular and whatever's trendy at the moment. Or we get so outraged over individual things, we don't look at bigger systemic.
Well, that's actually my argument.
Evils.
My argument is that the bigger systemic argument is not about what tweets, you've got, what of your tweets have been taken down and things like that. It's that there are organizations out there that are experts on, hate and discrimination that are saying that the positives outweigh the negatives if we actively, campaign, and these companies do take down hate speech, and they do take down certainly incitement to violence speech. That's what people from experts on hate and communities of color are saying.
But taking down hate speech is protected speech under the First Amendment. So yes, under the model that I'm proposing, where it's a national forum, hate speech would be allowed. Threats and incitement would not. That's not protected speech, and that can be restricted.
I know, but there's, like I said, there's a very fine line between hate speech and incitement to violence. So
But you're just getting rid of what you're doing is you're getting rid of the for-profit motive. So, and you're getting rid of the arbitrary moderation that exists today. Glorifying violence. What does glorifying violence mean? Certainly Twitter thought that it meant a video showing Yemenis digging out the bodies of their children.
I think that individual case that you're talking about, Walker, is just a bad decision.
But it happens repeatedly. And I've talked to journalists in Yemen who are reporting on the devastation around them, who say that they don't feel comfortable posting everything online because they don't want their accounts to be limited or censored or or deactivated. I mean, this is the danger here of having a private company in charge of it. They have no incentive to. First of all, they have no journalistic responsibility or even appreciation for their role in the national discourse. As much as they may attest to it, they don't really have an appreciation for the role that they play. And I think today, these platforms have gotten so big, they're so ubiquitous, they're so impactful that it can't be left in private hands. It simply can't. There has to be a clear process, a clear set of restrictions that apply, and an appreciation for, I don't know, open dialogue.
I agree with you that there needs to be, that it shouldn't be decisions by, again, Zuckerberg or just anyone at the helm of these companies. They should not be arbitrating what we can see and what we can't see.
Nor should it be mob rule, though.
It shouldn't be. It should not be mob rule either. I mean, I am all for building whether it's a government entity or a non-government entity, just a transparent committee where the rules are clear. There's an arbitration process where things are transparent, where there's not just a wall of silence that you're shouting into if you want to, appeal something having been taken down. And we can make these communities just much better places for discussion, and make them forces for good instead of, just at worst propaganda arms that are just feeding off of people's outrage.
Well, yeah, I would just recommend. I like what Change the Terms is doing. That's a coalition of Color of Change, SPLC, Lawyers Committee, etc. It's changetheterms.org, and I think they have a very kind of smart takes on a lot of these issues. Yeah, and they definitely don't advocate for a government kind of moderated system. I'm of two minds of that, but I think if we're talking about like this stuff is going to go just be arbitrated in the courts, I mean, think about how long that stuff's going to take, like versus human moderators. So I don't know, but I just think, Change the Terms has some good ideas. And they have a definition for incitement to violence, that kind of stuff, that I think that these companies really should take heed of. There's a lot of problems with the large social media companies, and certainly not the least of which is that these companies accept money for paid political advertisements. Twitter actually decided not to continue its program of running election ads pretty recently, but Facebook clearly has not stopped the practice. We get into issues of money being speech, which of course we talked about in our episode on Buckley v. Vallejo, which is completely absurd. But we also have foreign countries that are using Facebook and until recently Twitter to run at least suggestively political ads, if not overtly political ads, which is actually illegal if they're tied to elections and supporting or opposing certain candidates who are up for election. And we talked a little bit about this earlier about the Russiagate issues.
So this is actually a good thing to talk about, because even if these platforms were publicly run or were public platforms, you'd still run into this issue. Like maybe you don't have the problem of algorithms, but you do have the problem of Buckley, where in a public square, paid political ads, or you could ostensibly be overrun with paid political ads. So while I do think that ultimately the direction we should go is having a public social media platform, I do recognize that before we get there, we have to change the standard that was set in Buckley, where spending money is speech, because otherwise we will just have a free-for-all among America's political class of who can propagandize the most.
So these social media platforms basically put Buckley on steroids, because there's never been a more closer connection between money and speech. You can literally put a credit card in on Facebook or Instagram and just turn the dial as loud as you want, depending on how much money you have, and amplify your speech, which is why I do think that there needs to be more regulation and consideration to speech than is given in a public square where everyone's voice is equal.
Well, yeah, and there's definitely the issue of online political advertising being fairly new, and are already deficient campaign finance regulations being even more deficient when they're trying to deal with this, and expecting a company like Facebook to accurately label ads as independent expenditures, which means you're saying vote for this person or vote against this person, versus electioneering communications, which are just like ads that have implications for an election that is upcoming, and they address probably a candidate, but they don't actually tell the voter what to do, which are both two types of things that you need to report to the Federal Election Commission. So Facebook is doing a terrible job of that, I would say. And there's also the even more concerning issue of, are foreign entities able to take out political ads in American elections, which is completely illegal. But there's the issue of perhaps, first of all, does Facebook even know who's advertising on their platforms? Are there third-party ad buyers that other countries can use? And these are some things that were brought up in congressional hearings, that one of which Zuckerberg was in attendance for. But I don't think there's really been any resolution. And to make matters worse, the Federal Election Commission is again without a quorum. It had a quorum of 4 people for 6 weeks, and a Republican member just announced her retirement. She's going to work for a Charles Koch-funded organization called Stand Together. Now, the Kochs are, of course, known for opposing any restrictions on money in politics. It couldn't be more perfect that she would leave a defunct, basically a coalition that didn't do anything, was gridlocked, had recently been without a quorum, recently got a new guy who doesn't believe in regulating political speech. Is Trey Traynor is a new commissioner, but then she leaves, so that now they're down to 3, which is below the number for a quorum. So it's a pretty amazing situation out there. But this is all to say that the political advertising online it needs to be improved in a major way.
So to summarize, social media platforms have become an integral part of our lives, an integral part of our national conversation, and yet despite that, they're rife with problems. You have algorithms that prioritize the salacious. You have a profit incentive that is divorced from social need. And on top of that, you have paid political advertising, which is problematic in its own right, and loopholes for foreign nations to influence our elections that are legal loopholes. And so ultimately, and then of course, on top of all of that, you have online hate to deal with. So there are many facets to this problem, and where we ultimately come out is this is uncharted territory as a country. The digital age is still nascent.
Yeah, to bring it back to the beginning, we are subjects of the largest ever psychological experiment.
That's true.
And it's unclear what the results will be.
So whether we have just better regulation of these private companies, these private platforms, that seems to be the most immediate fix. Or if we ultimately end up nationalizing and having a national online social media platform, that's still very far off in the future. But it's unclear the direction that we are headed. We should be skeptical, I think, of calls to demands on these companies to moderate their content, because they don't have the wherewithal to do it, or even the right motivations behind it.
And we're not sure we want to give them that power. There's an irony here, because the people that think these platforms are too powerful want to give them more power to, shape the discussion and decide what we can and can't see.
But that, I mean, a third party could help moderation actually in both scenarios with these private companies, or if it were nationalized and it was a government platform for speech, they could still be required to delegate those decisions to a council of experts on misinformation and hate speech and things like that. I mean, I'm skeptical of what that committee would turn into. Like anything else, would be politicized, and you'd have like Candace Owens on there, and then you'd have like Larry Lessig on there. It would just make no sense. But I don't know. I don't know if there is. I mean, honestly, having had this discussion with you guys today, I'm actually more pessimistic about any kind of solution than I was going into this, and I worry that there really isn't any. There's no way to stop it, unless you shut down Facebook. There's no way to stop it.
Well, I think that's sort of
The genie's out of the bottle, though. There's no...
Right.
It's too late.
That's sort of why I support this idea of having of nationalizing or having a national thing, because at least then there are a clear set of guidelines, and that's First Amendment law, which even a conservative court is going to be may tend on the libertarian side, which I think is probably better when it comes to restricting content. We want a more libertarian approach to speech, except, and this is a big one, money. So as long as that standard is in play, what I'm talking about is unworkable. So it's a difficult situation. We face a big hurdle, but I think understanding the problem is probably the first step. And us, the three of us, are not going to solve it here today. But it is food for thought for our listeners.
And, the moral of the story for me really is just to quit Facebook. So I encourage everyone to quit Facebook and stop giving Mark Zuckerberg your data and your money. I know it's hard for organizers to do that. I have many friends who are in organizing and tell me it's just impossible the way things are right now to do what they're doing, the important work they're doing, without the effective organizing tool of Facebook. But, just to oversimplify things, I would just say, quit it. Just stop it. Cut it out. Stop.
Data privacy is something we didn't even talk about today.
Well, yeah.
That's a whole other issue that we can talk about. But anyway, if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to our Patreon and listen to us and share us with your friends and family.
Please do, and rate us. Apple Podcasts has a rating system. There's 5 stars. I would assume you're gonna give us 5 stars, obviously, because we deserve it. So just do that.
Well, someone's confident.
There's really no other option, guys. Do you really want to be a railroad tycoon or not? I mean, come on. If you can't be a tycoon,
I give us a 3. I give us a solid 3 for sure. 3.
That's pretty. Come on, Walker.
5? Come on, man.
Yeah. Look, we're asking you to give us a 6-star rating
exactly.
on Yelp. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of Gilded Age. Tune in next week for our next discussion of how and why we're fucked.